Hey students, it's Anna Otto. Just want to do a real quick overview of some of the key concepts from chapter 12, which is about emotional and social development in adolescence. So the first thing we come across is Erikson's theory, and this is the point at which Erikson talks about the stage of identity versus role confusion. You can see a few of the key points about identity here, that it's the major personality attainment of adolescence, that it's a crucial step toward becoming a productive, content adult, and that it involves figuring out who you are, what you value, and what your direction in life is. So doing that real kind of deep soul searching, figuring out who you are on your own as you get ready, prepare to move into adulthood and typically separate from your family. Identity is driven by, or drives choice for vocation, interpersonal relationships, ethnic group memberships, expression of one's sexual orientation, and ideals. So again, about everything that constitutes who you are, what you value, and what you want to do with your life. If one doesn't achieve a solid sense of identity, then you run the risk of role confusion or not really understanding who you are or what's important to you or what you want to do in life. Identity is certainly informed by this developing sense of self-concept or how we see ourselves. Our self-concept gets even more complex as we move from middle childhood to adolescence, and some abstract ideals and ideas about how we should be and adding in principles and values start to become a part of our self-concept. And then remember, relatedly, self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves. Again, all of these very interrelated concepts and ideas. In the chapter and in the module, you're also introduced to identity statuses. So this big job of figuring out who you are, what's important to you, and what you want to do with the rest of your life takes a lot of work. It's not something that just comes about magically, but it involves completing some exploration, kind of testing the waters, if you will, and then some commitment, deciding that yes, this is my goal and trying to move toward that goal. And so there are 4 potential identity statuses. See them here: the identity achievement, identity moratorium, identity foreclosure, and identity diffusion. Not going to go into this in more detail because there's a really great video link that I put into the module. But again, this is all about that process of identity development and kind of solidifying our idea of who we are. Now, mind you, this doesn't happen in a void from prior periods. Certainly, kids get information about factors related to their identity as they're growing and developing in earlier years, but it really comes to the forefront as kids are starting to be faced with the challenge and the idea of moving beyond childhood and moving into adulthood. Chapter also talks about moral development, specifically looking at Kohlberg's theory. Again, lots of good information for you in the text and the module about this. I will tell you that the level at which I expect you to understand this is the level of the levels. So understanding the difference between the pre-conventional level, the conventional level, and the post-conventional or principled level. I won't specifically ask you to identify individual stages, but realize that there are 2 stages per level, 6 stages total in the 3 levels. Not everybody makes it to the highest stage or the highest level, and that's actually a critique of Kohlberg, the fact that particularly in some less developed areas, individuals are much less likely to get to these highest levels. And it's not because they're not ethical or moral, but because they're not given the opportunity to learn and experience things in the same way that we are in more developed areas. Also been critiqued, Kohlberg has, in terms of the fact that many feel his ideas are male-centric, are really focused on morality from a male standpoint rather than a female standpoint, that females oftentimes have more direct care and much more intertwined with the care of others. And that really gets devalued in a sense with Kohlberg's ideas, which are really more about justice. So particularly Carol Gilligan is a critic of Kohlberg's who focuses on the idea of Kohlberg being male-centric. So having an idea of the levels, what each of the levels might look like, and then some of the concerns that have been expressed about Kohlberg's theory will be important. Gender, another big area, and we've talked a bit about gender typing or the development of kind of these gender ideas as we've gone through the different age periods. One term that we'll hear sometimes is this idea of gender intensification, or becoming increasingly tied to or aware of these gender stereotypes, attitudes, and ideas, and feeling much more committed to staying aligned with the gender expectations of one's gender. We see that for boys at the latter half of middle childhood, there tends to be a period of gender intensification. When it happens for girls, it more often happens at the beginning of adolescence. And usually by late adolescence, this gender intensification or this really strong need and commitment to following the rules and expectations tends to tone down a bit for both sexes. And this is the age period I always talk about with girls in particular, and how we say at the beginning of adolescence, girls are more likely to display this gender intensification. Talked a little bit before, I think, about, the concept of a tomboy. So a girl who dresses, acts, enjoys activities that are more traditionally considered to be male. Oftentimes that same little girl will all of a sudden be wearing dresses and skirts and worrying about her hair and makeup as she transitions into adolescence and starts to experience some of these pressures to conform with the gender expectations for a female in society. That's an example of gender intensification. Certainly, biological, social, as well as cognitive factors are all involved in any way that we think and express and try to make sense of concepts. And for both sexes, having some level of androgyny tends to be the most beneficial. That doesn't mean androgynous in that you can't tell if somebody's a girl or a boy, but androgynous in that they're accepting of what are perceived as strong characteristics of both sexes. So a girl who's strong, a boy who's sensitive. Typically we associate being strong more with being male, but certainly that's a good characteristic for our girls also. Typically we associate being sensitive more with being female, but again, that's a good characteristic in our males. So that's what we're talking about with androgyny here. Relationships with parents certainly undergo some changes, and particularly as kids are pushing for autonomy or pushing away from developing a sense of oneself as separate, self-governing individuals, so pushing away from parents, both in terms of emotions and behaviors, that can cause some friction in parent-child relationships. So as kids try to push away, sometimes parents will try to pull kids back in closer, and that can cause some conflict. And so certainly parent-child conflict tends to increase over adolescence. However, most relationships between parents and children in adolescence are primarily positive and primarily strong. And in particular, if you go into adolescence with a good parent-child relationship, you should go through adolescence with a good parent-child relationship and come out of adolescence with a good parent-child relationship. Part of what happens during adolescence, though, as well as kids trying to push away as they're working on their identity and their autonomy, kids also start to de-idolize parents. So when kids are really little, they tend to really look up to their parents, perceive their parents as being able to do no wrong. By the time they're teens, they start to realize, hey, my parents don't really know it all. And de-idolize, so not look up to in the same way that they did. Not surprisingly, an authoritative parenting style is the most beneficial. Authoritative parenting style keeps the parent in charge with rules and expectations, but also has the parent thinking about listening to the child and their needs and taking into consideration their development. Last part of the chapter talks about friendships and adolescence, and so friends are very important for kids. A lot of how kids test out their ideas about who they are and how they fit into the world happens within friendships. Number of best friends tends to decline, so that kids are getting smaller, tighter circles, and that leads to greater intimacy and support that's necessary as kids are going through and kind of really trying to figure out who they are and what's important to them. Our book talks about cliques and crowds. Cliques are small groups, about 5 to 7 best friends. Crowds then are bigger groups of kids, usually multiple cliques coming together. In adolescence, kids consider intimacy, mutual understanding, and loyalty to be the most important characteristics of a friendship, so what they look for in friends. And friends tend to be those people who are more alike us than different from us. So similar in identity status, similar in educational aspirations, similar in political beliefs, as well as in potential willingness for undesirable activities such as drugs and delinquency. Okay, that's a quick overview. Take care.